I never thought betrayal would come wearing a smile and calling me Mum. For 78 years, I managed my own life just fine. I cooked my meals, paid my bills, tended my garden, and walked to the village post office every Thursday, rain or shine. My little red brick cottage in Sussex wasn't much to others, but to me, it was a kingdom. One built with love, laughter, and a lifetime of small moments. After my husband George passed, people kept asking if I'd be all right on my own. Of course, I told them. I've got my roses, my kettle, and a good book. What more does a woman need? And it was true. I missed George's chuckle echoing through the kitchen, but I felt his presence in every corner of that house. His favorite chair still faced the window, just as he'd left it. I talked to him sometimes, not out loud, just quietly, in the way old souls do. My children, Mark and Lydia, didn't see it that way. Mark was always practical, too practical. He worked in finance, wore suits that cost more than my monthly pension, and spoke in a tone that made everything sound like a business deal. Lydia, younger by 6 years, was a real estate agent who saw value in square footage and resale potential. Together, they were a dangerous combination. Money-minded, impatient, and utterly convinced they knew best. It started small. Lydia would drop by to help with groceries, but she'd spend more time commenting on how big the house felt for just one person. Mark began calling twice a week to ask if I'd had any falls lately. I could hear the rehearsed concern in his voice, the same tone he used when talking to clients he wanted to impress. Then one Tuesday morning, the betrayal arrived. I was in the kitchen, making tea, when a black car pulled into the drive. Mark and Lydia stepped out, dressed too neatly for a casual visit. Behind them, 2 men in blue uniforms were unloading a wheelchair. My stomach turned cold. "Mum," Mark said gently, as if approaching a frightened animal, "we need to talk." They sat me down at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once fed them jam sandwiches and scolded them for stealing biscuits before dinner. Lydia took my hand. "You know we love you," she began in that sweet, rehearsed tone that always meant trouble. "But we've been worried. The neighbors said they've seen you struggling with the bins. You nearly tripped last month, didn't you?" "I caught my foot on the hose," I snapped. "That's hardly a crisis." Mark sighed heavily. "Mum, it's time. We've found you a lovely place, Rosefield Nursing Home. It's clean, safe, and you'll have people around to help." "I don't need help." My voice cracked, but they didn't flinch. "You can't just." But they could. They'd already signed the papers. The decision had been made long before I even knew there was one to make. They talked over me, the way grown children do when they forget their parent is still alive and capable of speaking for herself. Within an hour, they were packing my things, my knitting, my framed photos, even the worn apron I'd used for 20 years. I tried to protest, but my words fell like feathers against a brick wall. As they wheeled me out, I looked back one last time. The house was quiet, sun streaming through the window onto the empty kitchen table. George's chair still sat by the window. For a moment, I could almost hear him say, "Don't let them take your spark, love." But I couldn't fight them, not yet. The car door shut with a metallic click, sealing my fate. The road stretched ahead, unfamiliar and gray. I felt like a prisoner being taken to a place where time itself forgot to move. They said it was for my own good. But as the gates of Rosefield Nursing Home came into view, I knew the truth. They hadn't done it out of love. They'd done it out of greed. And one day, I promised myself, they would regret it. They called it Rosefield Nursing Home, but it might as well have been the waiting room for the forgotten. Everything smelled faintly of bleach and overcooked vegetables. The walls were painted the color of cold porridge, and every corridor hummed with the same dull tune of buzzing lights and shuffling slippers. The air itself seemed tired. The nurses were polite enough, mechanical smiles, gentle voices, but eyes that darted away when you spoke too long. Most of them didn't remember your name, just your room number. Room 14, that was me. The first night, I lay in that narrow bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of someone's oxygen machine through the wall. I thought of my own bed back home, the one George and I had shared for 40 years, still faintly scented with lavender and his cologne. Now it belonged to strangers. For days, I kept quiet, just watching, learning the rhythms of the place. Breakfast was served at 8, lukewarm tea, soggy toast, and porridge that could patch a roof. At 10 there was group activity time, which usually meant a volunteer reading newspapers aloud to people who'd long stopped caring about the news. Lunch, nap, bingo, dinner, bed. It was a loop that stole the sense of days. But then there was Ella. She was different. Young, no more than 25, with kind blue eyes and laughter that sounded out of place among the creaking wheelchairs and sighs. She didn't treat me like a patient. She talked to me, not at me. She'd sneak me extra biscuits and tell me stories about her little brother who wanted to be a musician. "You remind me of my gran," she'd said once, tucking my blanket. She used to say old age isn't a weakness, it's proof you survived. I liked that girl. I didn't tell her how broken I felt inside, but her kindness made the silence bearable. It was a week into my stay when something changed. That afternoon, I decided to unpack my knitting bag, my one comfort from home. I'd always kept it with me, stuffed with yarn, needles, and a few small keepsakes. As I pulled out a half-finished scarf, something small and folded fell to the floor. A lottery ticket. I stared at it for a long moment, blinking. It all came back in a rush. The corner shop, the friendly cashier, the sound of rain on my umbrella. I'd bought it the very morning Mark and Lydia arrived, before my world turned upside down. Buying a ticket had always been my little ritual since George died. He'd believed luck favored the hopeful. I'd play the same numbers every week. For 17, 23, 36, 42, and 48. Our dates, our moments, our memories. I almost threw it away. What use did I have for a dream anymore? But that evening, while the others sat watching television in the lounge, the lottery draw came on. The announcer smiled from behind his perfect teeth, reading the winning numbers. I whispered them under my breath, just out of habit. For 1723. I froze. 36. My heart began to thump. 4248. I checked again. Then again. Every single number matched. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the ticket. I slipped it into my cardigan pocket, heart pounding like a drum. I didn't shout. I didn't tell a soul. Instead I smiled, the kind of small, private smile that hides a storm behind it. The irony was almost poetic. My children had locked me away, stripped me of my home and dignity, certain I had nothing left. And here I was, holding a piece of paper worth $62 million. I glanced around the room. Nobody noticed. The others dozed in their chairs, the TV muttering nonsense to no one. I looked down at that ticket and whispered, "Well, George, it seems your numbers finally came in." Somewhere deep inside me, the spark that Mark and Lydia tried to snuff out began to burn again. Quietly, fiercely, like embers refusing to die. I didn't yet know how, or when, but I promised myself one thing that night. They took my freedom, but I would take back everything, and more. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't tell anyone, not even Ella at first. Instead, I sat quietly in room 14, knitting my scarf and watching the world go by, all the while holding the secret that would change everything. 62 million pounds. Mine. Every penny. It was almost funny. The audacity of it. Here I was, the so-called frail old lady, in a nursing home nobody noticed, and I held in my hands more wealth than most of the staff or residents could ever imagine. Mark and Lydia had assumed I was powerless, irrelevant, forgettable. They had no idea how dangerous a patient underestimated can be. I began planning. Not recklessly, not impulsively. I had always been methodical. After all, George had taught me to balance a checkbook, negotiate a tricky contract, and always read the fine print. I would take back my life quietly, efficiently, like a storm gathering strength under calm skies. The first ally appeared in the form of Ella, my kind-hearted nurse. One afternoon, I finally let her in on my secret. "You're joking," she said at first, eyes wide. I shook my head, smiling softly. "Not joking, my dear. Look at this." I handed her the ticket, neatly folded, edges worn from days in my knitting bag. She studied it carefully, and then just as carefully she smiled. "Mrs. Hart, we need to be careful. You can't just walk out with that in a home like this." "I'm not going to walk out just yet," I replied. "We're going to do it right." And then came Tom, a university volunteer who came to play chess twice a week. Clever boy, always thinking 3 moves ahead. I confided in him as well. Between Ella and Tom, I had two people who believed in me. And that's all I needed. Together, we began orchestrating what I would call my quiet revolution. Ella helped me collect my personal papers, ID, birth certificate, proof of residency, without raising suspicion. Tom helped me research lawyers who could handle lottery claims discreetly, people who wouldn't reveal a word until the prize was securely mine. Every evening, after lights out, I sat at the small wooden table in my room, poring over instructions, writing notes, making phone calls in secret. My knitting lay beside me, but it was secondary now. My mind was alive with possibilities. New houses, new lives, old scores to settle. I envisioned walking back into Mark and Lydia's world, not as the old mum they ignored, but as a queen in control of her destiny. The other residents, the ones who spent their days staring at the television or counting the tiles on the ceiling, had no idea a storm was brewing quietly among them. I was calm, polite, even sweet, all the while calculating my moves, arranging my resources, lining up allies, and imagining the eventual look on my children's faces. When the confirmation finally arrived, a discreet phone call from my lawyer, assuring me the ticket was legitimate and the funds could be accessed securely, I felt a strange mix of disbelief and vindication. My hands shook, but not from fear, from excitement, from power, from the realization that I had turned their cruelty into my opportunity. I began drafting letters, wills, and plans. Ella would receive a portion of the fortune for her kindness. Tom would be a trustee for the charitable foundation I intended to set up in memory of George. And as for Mark and Lydia, well, they were about to learn the difference between greed and consequence. By the time I returned to knitting each night, it was with a sense of calm satisfaction. I was no longer a powerless prisoner in a sterile room. I was a strategist, a quiet storm gathering strength, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Every time Mark called, pretending to check on me, I smiled politely, hiding the growing fire in my chest. Every time Lydia sent a text about worrying what I'd do next, I silently plotted the future she'd never see coming. They had thought they could cage me. They had thought they could take everything I'd built and leave me behind. They were wrong. And soon, very soon, they would see the storm they had unleashed. The day finally arrived when I stepped out of Rosefield nursing home, not as a fragile old lady, but as a woman armed with 62 million reasons to smile, and a heart full of quiet, calculated fury. I walked out in a modest coat, my knitting bag slung over my arm, Ella waving discreetly from the doorway. Tom had already gone ahead to arrange the lawyer meeting. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, my pulse thrumming with purpose. The cold air kissed my face, and for the first time since Mark and Lydia's betrayal, I felt free. The first step was subtle. I didn't rush into confrontation. I let the world see me as harmless, an elderly woman enjoying her newfound freedom. But behind that calm exterior, plans were moving like clockwork. Every phone call, every email, every meeting with my financial advisor was a step toward reclaiming what they had tried to take from me. My dignity. Mark was the first to hear from me. He called as usual, under the guise of concern. "Mum, are you feeling all right? How's the nursing home?" I smiled, hearing the old tone I knew so well. The one that used worry as a weapon. "Oh, Mark," I said sweetly, "I'm doing just fine. Actually, I'm doing better than fine. In fact," I paused, letting the silence hang, "I've just become a multimillionaire." There was a long pause. I could almost hear him digesting the words. What do you mean?" he stammered. "I won the lottery. All 62 million. Every last penny," I said, my voice calm, precise, and deadly satisfying. The next morning, Lydia received a carefully worded letter from my lawyer, informing her that I had transferred control of several joint assets into trusts inaccessible to her, and that a significant portion of my fortune would go to charities she had no influence over. I imagined her staring at it, realizing she had been outmaneuvered by the mother she thought was powerless. I moved carefully, deliberately, not out of malice, but out of justice. I didn't need to humiliate them publicly. I wanted them to feel the weight of their own greed. They had thought I was fragile, dependent, weak. The truth was, they had underestimated the power of a woman they had tried to cage. Meanwhile, Ella and Tom received their rewards discreetly. Ella got enough to buy her own home and start a fund for elderly residents like me who had been forgotten by their families. Tom, ever loyal, helped manage my charitable foundation, and together we began giving back in ways that my children could never have imagined. The ultimate satisfaction, however, came from the quiet moments, the letters they received, the hints of news stories about my charitable donations, the small, deliberate ways I made it clear that I was thriving without them. They watched from a distance, powerless to undo what they had caused. And me? I returned to my life fully on my own terms. I bought a small seaside cottage, planted roses just like George and I had always loved, and hosted dinners with friends who had been there for me when my own children turned away. I traveled, laughed, and yes, even splurged a little, because I could. I often sat in my garden at sunset, glass of wine in hand, thinking of that week in Rosefield nursing home. Betrayed, caged, forgotten. Yet all of it had led me here, to freedom and vindication. Mark and Lydia? They never truly apologized. They didn't have to. I didn't need their forgiveness. They had taught me something far more valuable. The strength of a woman who refuses to be underestimated, who refuses to be caged, and who refuses to let betrayal define her. I was Grandma Evelyn Hart, locked in a nursing home, betrayed by my own children, yet richer, wiser, and stronger than they could have ever imagined. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I whispered quietly to myself, "Let this be a lesson, my dears. You can lock me away, but you can never cage my spirit. And sometimes sweet revenge is the most beautiful freedom of all."